OCO, hello everyone. Welcome to Speaking Our Truth, podcast for change by the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. I am your host, Leanne Pippin, and I'm a member of Cherokee Nation. Before we get started, let's hear a quick word from NIWRC.
The NIWRC provides culturally grounded webinars to lift up the collective voices of grassroots advocates working to end violence against Native women. Sign up for upcoming webinars at niwrc.org/events.
No one ever expects a loved one to go missing, but we all expect that if it happens, law enforcement will do whatever they can to help. Unfortunately, that rarely happens in Indian country. Kaysera Stops Pretty Places went missing in 2019 at 18 years old. 5 days later, her body was found near a busy thoroughfare. 14 days later, her family was notified. No investigation occurred. There are still so many questions we have, but in this episode, we are going to focus on Kaysera's family. They have been organizing events for the past 4 years to bring awareness and ask for help in solving her case. This is a unique situation. It's about what happens when you can't rely on law enforcement. To this day, no one has been charged for her murder. 4 years later, her auntie, Dr. Grace Bulltail, her grandmother, Yolanda Frazier, and their attorney, Mary Catherine Nagel, continue to ask law enforcement to investigate her homicide. We hope that this episode can help other families of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples too. If you have any questions or comments, you can always get in touch with us at info@niwrc.org or visit our website, niwrc.org/contact-us. Today we have Dr. Grace Bulltail, Yolanda Frazier, and their attorney, Mary Catherine Nagel. Thank you all for joining us for Speaking Our Truth, podcast for change. We're going to start by asking everyone, what prompted you to create the hashtag Justice for Kaysera campaign?
Okay, well, it was to bring awareness. I really think we had no communication, no response from any official in the sheriff's department or county attorney. And we were just up against closed doors. Our only way to really have a voice was to make our presence known, and be out there. The idea of it, to do a memorial, I was thinking of just doing a rally, and then we got together with, everybody's ideas coming in with Grace and Mary Catherine, and it turned into a week of events because the different things that happened, when they found her body and didn't tell us, and then it wasn't until, week and a half, 2 weeks later, they finally told us. So, with that in mind, we wanted to bring that and keep it out in front of the public, in front of the officials.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of a week either, but that makes total sense.
I think some of it started because, Grace was, and feel free to jump in here, Grace. Grace was going back home for Crow Fair, which is always right around Kaysera's birthday. And then sort of right after Crow Fair is the anniversary of when she went missing. And Grace started hosting Facebook Live events and just showing up at the spot where her body was found on August 29th. And just having like vigils there and just sort of marking the spot and having people come by and show their support, but also trying to talk to people in the community around the silence about it and just trying to raise awareness. And so, that was sort of organic in terms of how it happened. And Yolanda wanted to host a rally. So we started talking about it as being this sort of period of events, so that also to show what the family went through in terms of she went missing on the 24th of August, but didn't find out from law enforcement as her body had been recovered until September 11th. And so going through having a series of events where there's something happening every day of that time period also highlights that was yet another day that the family was out searching for her without any actual communication from law enforcement, even after they found her, which was absurd.
Yeah, I think that our now yearly events have turned into, as much as we don't want to admit it, like marking the amount of time that's passed that we feel that nothing's still being done. I mean, I remember when we had our 6 month event, and that seemed like so long, to us. And then now we're going on 4 years. I hate to think of, how old Kaysera would be, but that first year, I think it was just trying to process what happened. And, I couldn't bear to think that it was a year. I went back to the site where it happened, and I was there for 5 days. And I don't know. I mean, I think that I just didn't care that if the neighbors or the police or whoever would say something to me, but they didn't. I just think that there needs to be more community. I don't know if awareness is the word, but outrage, or I just feel like some people didn't know what we were doing. And I don't know, but I think the point was just to show that this meant something to us, that we're extremely impacted by it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that going forward, we have become more strategic about what we're going to ask for, what we hope our next steps will be, and also inviting other families to join in as a remembrance for all MMIP and ongoing deaths that are continuing to occur in the area.
Right, because you joined with the family of Henny Scott at one point to rally, to march to the Bighorn County office at one point.
Yeah, that was the initial within the month that we learned of Kaysera's death. That was like the first march, and that was mainly Yolanda's community, the Northern Cheyenne community, that came out and led that and organized it. I mean, because a lot of us were, we were barely able to function. So, we're always thankful for that, and always welcome the support of, the families that have been doing this for years now.
I know we had initially, which is I'm so grateful for, in past years before this grassroots movement for advocacy started, there was really, you didn't see walks or rallies or anybody making noise, or, families were isolated, going on their own to try to get answers, and bureaucracy they just put barriers up, and so they just get pushed down, with discouragement. And I always think of it as like just insulate themselves, So with this advocacy that started through, in Canada with our relatives up there, and then moving down here into the United States, I had a couple of family members that were familiar with MMIW and familiar with, the organizing a march and a walk. And right away they asked, shall we do this? You want to do this? And so we jumped in with it, jumped on the wagon, and just been there ever since, And there's really no backing down now. This is a crisis that's going on, is so huge, and it just crosses so many states and countries. It's just it's gotta end somehow, and we just have to keep, that from now on. That's my passion and how I make my journey on. I know a lot of younger people that I talk to in my family and in the community are really dedicated to continue to keep this work going and help other families, and bring awareness, try to if we can't end it completely, at least we can cut the numbers down.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about what's been your experience with reaching out to the media? How has it helped? How has it not helped? You know, who gets the details right as well?
I think in my experience, it's all a learning curve, you know. And from the get-go, a lot of media outlets, they want some kind of, I guess they call it a hook or something to sensationalize within their story to grab people's attention. And I call it drama. You know, they try to throw some. It's as if our this murder and the way this case has been handled, Kaysera's case has been handled, isn't enough. There's just so many twists and turns with it, and things that are just unbelievable, you know, that happen here. And I like the way you brought that out in the beginning, that when someone goes missing, because we belong in a democracy, we belong in a country that has these systems in place to protect us and to help us. So we have that rightful expectation that they are going to assist us and help us. So when you turn and you try to get that help, cry out for it, you fight for it, and it just isn't there. It's not forthcoming. Actually, barriers are put up so you don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's that in itself is it's just a huge impact. So with the media, I've come to accept that they will add what they want. You don't have control over what they do. Make sure that they're not limiting you in a way that will silence you. And that happened to in a case with one of the media outlets wanted to have me write sign an agreement that I would not speak about this again. You know, for they would own all the rights to anything I said, did, or provided, basically. And it distance. I was like, no, you're not gonna silence. There's no silencing here, you know. And
I know.
so,
I'm like, I don't mean to laugh, but that sounds so weird.
yeah, and so read it over, and then I sent it over to Mary Catherine to look over. And it was hard dealing with them, but it was a platform that we felt had a really wide reach. And so we did work with them in the end. They did eventually agree. We came to an agreement, and we were able to move forward with it. So I think all in all, with most of the media, they aren't going to get every detail correct, even if they are diligent about it, I guess. And they will sensationalize it somewhat, you know. So one of the things to be careful about is to research them, you know, ask around about them if they're able to, and see if they're credible, and see what kind of audience they have, look at their platforms. There's different podcasts and directors. You can look them up and you can see their style and that kind of thing before you commit.
You really want, as an advocate, either be from within the family or an advocate for the family, you want the story to get out there. But these are cases that have not been investigated. You also want to make sure you're not harming an investigation that could eventually happen. And so it's a tough balance because a lot of people want to, in telling the story, want to talk about who did it, right? And that's interesting and compelling for a documentary. But if you go too far down that road, you can be tipping off prime suspects before law enforcement's actually shown up to do the investigation. And so if you, as the documentary filmmaker or the CNN journalist or whoever you are, you know, say, here's the person that the family thinks did it, and then all of a sudden law enforcement's like, okay, we'll investigate now. And now that person's nowhere to be found because they were tipped off that they're a prime suspect in this murder. That's not helpful. And I think that's something that unfortunately some of the journalists and folks covering this issue don't fully think through, because they're not the family trying to get an investigation. They're making a compelling story because that's what they do. They're storytellers, you know, so it's that dynamic that I think can be challenging and dangerous. And it's something that every MMIP family member has to kind of worry about when they weigh the pros and cons of talking to the media. And that's, just
it's a shame that it's a shame that that's something that you have to think about whenever you're just trying to get information out into the public. And as journalists, that is 100% something that you should be thinking about before you're writing a story or producing a story or shooting a story is, will this cause harm to the people that it's about? Will this hurt or help them? That is absolutely something that you have to consider as a journalist. It's like your ethical responsibility. So to put that responsibility on you to have to think about that first is a lot to handle. It is not an exaggeration at all to say that the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office and the FBI and the Montana Department of Justice have done absolutely nothing to investigate Kaysera's murder. What has been the most helpful to you, Yolanda and Grace and Mary Catherine, in getting Kaysera's story to the public?
One thing that I think is helpful and that I'll look out for is if a family member writes their own article or produces something themselves, I'll watch other families' live streams. I mean, that's more helpful to me to see what they're doing. With social media now, we can do that. We can critique what we've heard. That's at a level that we think is helpful, that we want to share. I mean, I would like to see, more family members writing books. I think that we should be able to tell our own stories. And I think where a lot of this gets lost is when we're telling Kaysera's story, that there's a lot of time spent on just explaining Indian country, like we all know. I don't know. I mean,
again, I don't mean to laugh, but I just know it is so complicated.
I mean, we don't talk about someone who goes missing in Florida and explain the whole history of the state of Florida in non-native cases, right?
That's a great point.
I felt like a lot gets lost in that. It's okay, we've had so many stories about Bighorn County. Can we just focus on what we're trying to convey here? So that's something that I support is, families telling their own stories, supporting them, showing up for them, because they are the experts on what they're doing, what they're asking for.
Thanks, Grace. Miss Yolanda or Mary Catherine, is there anything that you wanted to add?
I was thinking about what Grace was saying, going directly to the families or the content that they produce, because that's where you'll find the facts, the true facts and details. When you're fighting for justice, it's about the inaction of the officials, their negligence, their biases, their whatever it is that's holding them back from doing a proper investigation. In our case, in Kaysera's case, even doing an investigation, that in itself, in the beginning, when I first heard that, we had suspected, but in my mind, I thought it was only a week. And then it comes out, they just didn't do an investigation. And it hurt. It really hurt that they didn't value her life, and they didn't value Kaysera's life. But she did not matter. So I think that's one of the engines behind all of our work is we're letting people know that her life did matter. She does matter, and we love her. When someone passes, you don't stop loving them. We love her deeply, and we miss her deeply, and we're her voice, her collective voice,
Mary Catherine, I have a question. Whenever something like this happens where it just seems so obvious that an investigation needs to happen, what are your options as just a normal person to be able to do anything about that?
Right now, they're very limited. And I think that it's going to be important to see what recommendations the Not Invisible Act Commission makes, but also just to talk to MMIP family members who can just tell you what the problems are. Because right now, yes, we have jurisdictional issues in Indian country. Yes, the Supreme Court took away tribal criminal jurisdiction in Oliphant. We could talk through the legal holes, but the real issue is, if you're dealing with a county or a state, law enforcement agency, oftentimes, for either corruption because they're actually protecting the perpetrator who committed the homicide, or just lack of prioritization. They don't value Native lives. They don't care that Native people are being killed. So therefore, they don't want to investigate this homicide. They will label the deaths of Native people as accidental, cause unknown, suicide, hypothermia, drug, alcohol. I mean, they tried to tell
Determined.
undetermined. They tried to tell Kaysera's family at first that it was drug or alcohol induced, and then the toxicology report came back and that definitively showed it could not have been, right? But they'll always go to that first. And what do you do? Because there is no mechanism in place right now. And I work with multiple families, and this is a really common theme, not just in Montana, but in North Dakota, South Dakota. I can't tell you the number of cases where they'll say, oh, it's suicide. And the family members will be saying, this person would never, she's a mother of 3. She would never have committed suicide. She was in a domestic violence relationship where she had called the police on the boyfriend multiple times. In that kind of a situation, you don't just say suicide, you investigate, especially where you have a history of domestic violence, which is, been demonstrated to escalate to homicide. But if you, as the family member, in our system right now, family members don't have the power to change that designation to a homicide, even if though they know it's a homicide. And the challenge is we have the missing and murdered unit in the Department of the Interior that Secretary Holland created. And that's great. Very thankful to have that. But when they look at a case, whoever that first agency was to show up on the scene, and the FBI does this too, by the way, on tribal lands. I mean, they'll say, the Stephen Bear Crane case is a great example. They'll say, well, that was just suicide, or he just shot himself, or it was an accident. The guy who shot him didn't mean to shoot him. They'll never label it homicide, right? When you ask the missing and murdered unit that Secretary Holland created to come in and investigate, they won't deem it a homicide if the initial agency didn't deem it a homicide. And so most of these things get stuck at just labeling it a homicide. And that's really frustrating for families. And there's the only thing I know to recommend to do is what Grace and Yolanda are doing, which is raise awareness, right? Because the more you raise awareness, the one thing that will impact some of these law agencies is just getting a bad reputation and bad publicity. They don't want people to think that they're corrupt jerks who don't care about public safety. So eventually, if a case gets enough attention, then maybe they'll change their minds. Or as Grace and Yolanda have done, they advocated in the community to get new elected county officials in office that would actually care about MMIP cases.
Right.
And so it takes that kind of advocacy from a family, because otherwise, as long as that law enforcement agency, whether they're state or federal, wants to say no homicide to see here, it's nearly impossible to get anyone to do anything.
I wanted to ask maybe specifically about these organizations like the Not Invisible Act Commission and how they have helped, because they weren't around when Kaysera went missing, right?
Well, and I don't know, Grace may not be able to comment on this since she's on the commission.
Correct. Yes.
I will say that I know several of the folks who are on the commission, and they are some of the most amazing advocates we have in Indian country when it comes to this issue. So I expect nothing but amazing things from these amazing advocates, but I also know the bureaucracy and the red tape that's been put around this commission. And I think the unfortunate reality is the most amazing advocates we have on the commission aren't in control of what that final report says. Maybe it will say really great things, but also we don't know. So I think it could go many different ways. I think it could end up producing a report that's incredibly helpful. It could also end up producing a report that's not helpful. And the unfortunate thing, again, is that there's so much bureaucratic red tape around it that the folks who are on the commission who really know what they're doing and who have important recommendations to give, their voices may or may not be heard through this process. And that's not their fault. That's, again, the way the process was created by the federal agencies that kind of are heading the process and sit at the table. So.
Yeah, I will add that there have been similar efforts before the Not Invisible Act. There have been a lot of studies and laws passed that are supposed to address MMIP, and we've cited that, like, okay, well, follow what X report said to do, because we're addressing a lot of the same issues. We keep coming back to states aren't complying with Savannah's Act, like that's been in place a lot longer. The Not Invisible Act was formed. It was not adopted yet, but it was formed before Kaysera went missing. And we're just now getting around to finalizing the report. I will say that, we voiced that there's problems with the federal government evaluating itself. I mean, because the things that we can recommend within the commission are majority for the federal government. So, we have limited ability to say the states and counties should do this. I mean, we can point that out, but there are some problems in this evaluation process, and there should be compliance with all these other efforts that have been recommended before this act. And we really tried to say that there should be more follow through because of the lack of implementation that's occurred so far. I will say that there were problems with getting the word out to the public, about the hearings that we've had, and it's because we follow the federal government's primary outreach to tribal leaders. So like your dear tribal leader, it wasn't dear MMIP family members, who were the people that showed up and we heard from and that are the most invested in the process. And we pointed that out, that there needs to be more empowerment of families. I mean, consulting tribal governments is great, but people that are actually doing this work and want and need to see change are the families. That's who we're going to see holding the people accountable that are in charge of following through with these recommendations that are coming out. All the guidance on how to address MMIP is going to be those family members at the end of the day.
I know during those hearings that were held in Billings and on Visible hearings, families traveled from all over the Northwest here to get there. And that was one of the things I heard from several was, their tribal leaders evidently got a notice, but they didn't get it out to the community. And one of the things that we encounter is just trying to get tribal leaders to even come to any event that we host, trying to get them educated. So there was a little disconnect with that, but we still had, from what I heard, I know there was 2 days of testimonies and they had to split them up. The commission had to split up in order to accommodate, trying to hear everybody's story, their testimony. And that whole program was that Montana had the largest of people come forward.
I mean, that speaks for itself.
Mm-hmm. We tried to be there and stay there because I know several families that I'm close to and our family members that could attend. We did have a couple of the Northern Cheyenne Tribal Council that made it. It's very triggering. And like Grace brought out, a lot of times when we're doing interviews and out at rallies and different things, it's emotionally draining. And then they turn around and only use a few lines, This is this work, I think, with the Not Invisible Act. I know when I testified, I could see, like, through all of this, and people are testifying and my own testimony, and individual commissioners that they're really cared and it's impactful, they're invested. And so I just encourage them, no matter what happens once they're dismantled, everything, to continue on supporting us, individually, continue to support this grassroots effort to help all the families, because they come from a huge background, education and skills. And so they have a lot to offer.
What seemed to be an unexpected challenge when pushing forward with the campaign Justice for Kaysera.
I will be honest, I did not expect it to be as hard as it is to get the MMU to investigate. I just thought, I know Secretary Holland personally. I know she really does care about MMIP. And when they were all like, we're creating this unit to investigate the homicides of Native people, I thought when you reach out to them, the answer would be, yes, this is a Native person and we will investigate the homicide. And I just had no idea that it would be so incredibly hard to get them to investigate. It's just not something I anticipated.
Is there like an approval process that they make you go through, or?
It's not a formal thing. I do think part of it is staffing and resources. I don't think that unit has the kind of resources and staffing it truly needs. You know, the FBI and DOJ have all these resources, but they don't prioritize the investigations of homicides of Native people. So that is certainly an issue. But again, too, there's a larger issue of this idea, whether it comes from, and I'm not sure exactly where it comes from, but this idea that the MMU cannot investigate if Bighorn County or the FBI or someone else has said, well, that's not a homicide. Because that's the primary problem we have, is that the homicides of Native people are being labeled by the people who don't want them to be investigated as suicides or natural causes or whatever. And so you've got families who have evidence to turn over to anyone who cares, right? But the MMU won't even look at that because I've had cases where they haven't even talked to the family. The family has evidence that no one's looked at or considered because no one took the case seriously ever. And the MMU won't even look at that because they look at the police file from a county and they say, oh, but it's not a homicide, so we're done. So that's been really challenging. And I just did not expect that. I do want to say there are some individuals at the MMU who are working very hard to work on these cases. So I don't want to act like everyone at the MMU is to blame. And I do think that part of the challenge they have is they don't have adequate funding or resources too. But we've got to get to a place where either we need the MMU to have the same authority, if not more authority than DOJ and FBI, or DOJ and FBI have to step up and actually do these investigations. And right now it's just, not working.
Miss Yolanda, Dr. Grace, is there anything that you ran into that you were like, whoa, I didn't expect that?
Yeah, I'll add that I feel like because we refused to just go away, that there were attacks made on us, on Kaysera. Further, just the amount, the attitude, the amount of victim blaming, the attitude of the county attorney. He issued a report, a press release about Kaysera, and just went into how everything was her fault. And now that we're finally getting more access to things we've been asking for, like a basic police report, for example, I'm just disgusted by other people in the community who, or just their victim blaming piece is included to fit the narrative of law enforcement. And I'm like, do we see this with other people that have been murdered or found deceased? Do we see attacks on their character so publicly? And it's because we've refused to go away. We've called these people out, and and that's their response. And when we are out there having our vigils, or in front of the courthouse, we do hear remarks that we should go home. People are upset with us for doing this, and so we've come to expect that, or at least I have. But it's only because of our actions that we had finally convinced the MMU to take the case. Otherwise, what would have been done at the end of the day? Exactly what they wanted, that we just bury Kaysera and that would be it. And I would imagine other families go through the same thing, or they would expect these things would happen to them, is why why we're so attacked. We have to go through, all the venues that there are to call this out. And as we're going along, we're learning that who participated in blaming Kaysera, and that we've also had to grow a thick skin and, just say, well, it's not about us and our feelings, right? Like we have to. It's just something that we have to deal with as Native people living in this community. And the worst thing has happened to us, but we still have to live our lives. And I don't know. I mean, I think that's how I approach it. I'm less concerned about how attacked I am or my feelings. We have to take a moment to be hurt with things that we've continued to learn, but just hope that if we call out the county, that it won't continue to happen. I mean, I don't know. How can you change racism? How can you change bias against victims?
So did things end up moving forward with the MMU and Kaysera's case?
Well, they have addressed us.
Okay.
So we think there's an investigation happening.
Okay.
It took, I believe, Mary Catherine can help with this, about 1.5 years from when we petitioned to request that they, review her case, and it took some time. At the hearings, the not invisible act hearings and billings, they did have a panel discussion and question and answer Q&A, talked about how they handle things, what their process is. And I was like Mary Catherine when they were first formed. I was like, oh my God, yes, this is going to be for every case. I was just taken aback there that they it isn't, and maybe it's a constraints of funding or whatever, but it comes back down to that again for our Native lives. It's up against policies. Our Native lives are up against funding, and that's across the board, county, state, federal. The more you investigate a case, the more you go into it takes funding and resources. So if they can just say, oh, this is that, close it. And a lot of it is based on what the county coroner determines, and they're not medically trained. And so from the very first step, you're getting a person that's determining the cause of death that isn't trained at all for that.
I do think, too, that it's really unfortunate that the FBI is so untouchable, because I have several cases that MMU officers have tried to get the FBI to investigate and or tried to get a file from the FBI to the MMU so the MMU can kind of pick up where the FBI left off. And the FBI has been very rude to not just me and the family, but like the MMU, and treats them like they're an inferior agency. And like, if the FBI is not going to investigate these homicides, one, they should, but two, they should treat the MMU with respect and not act like it's an inferior agency that doesn't deserve their respect. And I will say there's a lot of problems with the FBI right now, and that's something that the Biden administration has not even attempted to address.
So yeah, how can people reach out and connect with you to support all the work?
Well, we have created a nonprofit our family has to honor Kaysera, and she's so compassionate with people and taking people in and rallying for the underdog all the time, being there. So one of the ways that we wanted to support her is by creating this and having a platform to assist our families and our MMI. I'll say MMIP, MMIW, MMIR. There's still acronyms are changing all the time, but it's basically the same thing as murdered Indigenous people. So in the communities here, so we do have a website that we're right in the progress of creating. Also on the billboards, we have phone numbers on our billboard campaign that we're getting awareness out on. There's phone numbers there. Anybody can look up the nonprofit. It's called Pretty Eagle Woman Resource Foundation. There's a contact number on there. On Facebook, Grace has a Justice for Kaysera Facebook. We have a website, justiceforkaysera.org. The narratives there for Kaysera's case, how you can help. We also will be listing our Instagram and our, email contacts in all those different ways.
Yeah, I would say that we have a good number of our past events on our Facebook page, which I helped run, and we put those on for the last few years, and any updates that we come across. And there's still resources for how to send letters on the Justice for Kaysera website. And I just encourage everyone to support any MMIW, MMIP rallies, vigils that are happening locally, and to just listen to family members that are leading their own justice efforts within your own communities.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and say I echo everything that was just said. The justiceforkaysera.org website, the hashtag Justice for Kaysera, folks post on all forms of social media using that. And I also think following the work of NIWRC, Sovereign Bodies Institute, other organizations that are doing this work, finding the groups on Facebook where families are sharing information with one another. It's just a great way to get connected and try to, to get information and support. Or if you're just interested in helping to advocate, that's another great way to get connected. And, there's always webinars or things happening, especially with the great work that NIWRC does. So of course, thank you, NIWRC, for hosting this podcast. And again, for all of your advocacy for Kaysera's family, but also a lot of MMIP families too.
Thank you. Thank you both. Yolanda had to hop off early, so I'll send her a private thank you. I really appreciate the time that we got to spend together today. I know it's not easy conversations, but I really learned a lot and am very grateful for everybody here today. We will include all the links that were mentioned in the description of this episode, as well as on our website, NIWRC.org. For anybody looking for more information on Kaysera's case and how they can help, please visit justiceforkaysera.org. I am your host, Leanne Pippin. For more episodes of Speaking Our Truth Podcast for Change, visit wherever you find your podcasts or niwrc.org/podcast. Wodo, thank you everybody for listening. Take care.